want to see something really interesting?
Yes.
Look at this.
Wow.
So a friend of mine from high school, a friend of my younger brother, they used to hang out at my house. The whole student body of South High School had been through my house at one time or another. My younger brother and sisters lived there too. But anyway, this is an illustration I did during art school at the Colorado Institute of Art. And we would take a photograph, a black and white photo, and just use as high a chroma as possible to reinterpret it. And I had forgotten about this. Somehow he had it all these years. So anyway, he gave it back to me.
It's probably going to go in Liam's room.
Yes, that's it. So, good morning. So, thank you for coming to hear me talk about this. I thought I'd take the opportunity. As you can see, the show is really diverse in scope and subject matter and approach. And with each painting, believe it or not, is a very clear intention behind it. And so what looks to be the subject matter is really only secondary. Subject matter is interesting, of course, because that's the emotional connection you have to reality around us, right? But I'm easily distracted by just driving down the road by anything. A stump, a tree, a sign, shadow on the ground. But working with things, subjects like horses and cows, seeing them as I pass through in Pennsylvania, or, I've never painted horses until I was sent to a ranch, for example, to paint with 5 of the top landscape painters in America. They were to take care of us at this ranch for 5 days, for a week actually. So we were to go out and paint, and then come back, they'd take us. I walked past the corral, and I saw the horses for the first time, really. I spent the whole week there. I didn't do any landscape painting. And it's so unique to me how beautiful and the shapes, and that's what captures my imagination, is simple things like that. The figure in the forest is a thing I've been working with for over 25, 30 years. And I have this crazy idea, it just popped up in my head one day. I would love to paint a figure, which I've been painting, my entire career as an artist. What if I put the figure in the forest and make them all melt together like wax? So that, just seeing it like that. Well, it took me 2 years before I could make that happen to my satisfaction, because it was either too blown out, the shapes are all gone, or it's too realistic in a sense. So I'm still playing with that. And this one here, I'm introducing a shape theme to it, so it's a little bit more abstract. So it's combining interpretation of nature, and I'll explain it to you when you see that other painting over here. It's an imaginary painting as well, but it introduces shape into painting. So I'll explain that to you. So all I have to say, I might have an idea, and I get excited about that, but it'll take sometimes 2 years to make a painting work, and then once it does, it'll take another 30 years to just keep changing and playing with it. And so any one of these themes could become a whole lifetime of things for me to explore. That's the only problem. I hate going to sleep because I'm never done with the day, So I want to give you a little sense into how I think about painting, or what I see when I paint. Really, it all comes down to 5 basic visual elements. All painting can be abstracted down or reduced down to 5 basic visual elements. You have line, value, color, texture, and edges, right? And all of them go to do what? To describe shapes. Those are right? That's really it. What do you do with the line? You draw something, but really, in essence, you're drawing a shape. See? And a value isn't complete, or colors, imagine it. A color is really not a complete thing until it has a shape, an identity, a form of some kind, right? And then it's not complete until you place another color next to it for it to have a dialogue with, you see? So I was thinking about that, and I thought, well, imagine if you were, what was the first human walking down the beach, and they grab a stick on the ground and they dragged it on the beach, on the wet sand, and what you see is, you might see just a line, right? And next thing you know, they think, well, oh, that's interesting, what is that? And then they start to make little doodles with it, or whatever, and the next thing you know, you maybe they see a little animal shape come out of that, and the next thing you know, then art is born, right? With this line. And they work with that, and then, okay, so one caveman gets to be the smartest one of them all, and they get a little bit better at drawing, and become the resident artist, right? And they get better at drawing horses and that kind of thing. But think about how many years, how many hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, before the first one thought, well, if I can make this one a little darker than that one, then value is introduced into the dialogue, you see? And all of a sudden you think, oh, well, that one can be really dark. You know, so value is now part of the dialogue, see? Just think how many years before that understanding took place. It's not a small thing. And then, of course, in the caves in France, you'll see that there's some paintings of the buffaloes and stuff. They were using the earth to smear the red on there. And there was, of course, they introduced color. And of course, the charcoal from the smoke that they're drawing with. And the caves, is it Lascaux? Lascaux caves? They're so beautiful. They're really wonderful. But eventually, some of those drawings begin to explore with the quality of a line quality, so they actually have expression in the line quality too. So it's not just one kind of line. So then we get into the expressive quality of the application. That probably takes many thousands of years before they figure that out. And then of course color, texture is the different vibrational pattern or thickness of paint, right? Just to tell you that really the secret of painting and making art is understanding that you're doing nothing more than completing shapes. You can call it spaces. If you want to call it form, I read books that talk about form, but form implies three-dimensionality, and it doesn't have to be. So a shape can be just that. So next step, right? I'll do the next one here. So that's the raw material. Now comes the orchestration. Now comes the making of the music. Understanding what really goes into making a painting, right? So let me give you a little boundary here. So I gave this as an exercise to my, I used to teach this year-long class, and we meet once a week. And I took them through all the visual elements, and then all the different visual approaches or concepts in art. And one of the first exercises I gave them was, okay, put as many shapes in that boundary as you can. And so what I got was a lot of this. So people were just making, random shapes like that, or squares, and so they're just making shapes, right? And almost unanimously, everybody was doing that. They were just making shapes like that. And what you notice, right away, is that when I do this, what happens? The space behind it is not accounted for. It's the background. And how many artists throughout history do a painting of a head beautifully or whatnot, but never understood that the background is also a shape? So how do you solve a problem like that? So the way I see it now is there's no such thing as background. There's no such thing as a negative space. Everything is as important as everything. So how do you connect this? I needed an eraser, but it fell out in the car, I can't find it. But how, if I start, that seems to work. So if I started doing something like this, okay, just by losing a few, breaking the boundary of some of these things, what happens? The space around it, it connects to that background, all of a sudden becomes part of that, isn't it? My man. So you can see that immediately, what does that do? It connects everything visually, you see? And now comes a different exercise. I can now integrate that background by doing this, extending these shapes, and just the fact that I'm aware of spaces, of everything. It's just an awareness, right? And so I have circular shapes, I might do something like that. And all of a sudden, everything is activated. And so I can bring this in, do that. And now the whole thing becomes unique and specific shapes, right? Now, doesn't make this great because everything is kind of equal. That's the tendencies that the human mind does. You see little kids do this, draw a tree, and they go ding, 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 equal. One roof here, and it's all equal. We do that as adults too, and we don't even realize it, right? So it's one of the hardest things to do an abstract painting because the tendency is to make everything equal. That's why the great ones, whether they know it intuitively or intentionally, they get everything to activate in such a way that every space is unique and specific. Now, I arrived at that understanding not from reading any art books I've ever read, but from studying science. There's a great book called Chaos, The Science of Chaos, and it talked about fractal and how they would take that camera way up in space and take a shot of California coastline, and they keep zooming in by 10 times, and no matter where they are, the shape is always interesting. It never looked like, you would think it would be less interesting. It was always unique, and it's always interesting. And I'm like, ding, flashbulb went off in my head. Like, well, of course, nature is that way. If you really study leaves on a tree, and you stand there and study, even though they're all the same kind of leaves, they will never be the same size, just for the angle or whatever it may be, right? This is how I think about painting. No matter what painting you see in here, there is an absolute awareness of every space that's going on. Sometimes even that floating figure with the empty dark space behind her, even that space is broken down into more space, but at a glance it's one shape, you see. Does that make sense? And then you can introduce value and all of that too in a painting like this. You can assign it to maybe that shape, part here. You know, this kind of painting to me is actually very challenging and fun. I didn't understand this at all not too long ago, but then you can do this and join that shape to that shape. So it becomes like an exercise to see where you go. But the point is you're trying to arrive at shapes. And if there are spaces where you don't know what to do with, then that's your weakness. So you work on that until you figure it all out. But awareness is the key, right? Awareness is really the key. So whether it's a figure, like that figure in the corner there, there's form behind it, but then when I'm introducing these graphic abstract things in the background, I incorporate that to the front edge of the sheets in the foreground, repeating some of those shapes. And even her arms and legs echo some of those angles, you see. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's, so once you understand that it's about making shapes, all of art's history can be broken down into 8 visual approaches. This was a gift that my teacher, Rennie Bruin, gave me when I was around 19 years old. I was the hot shot in school who could outdraw everybody, right? And I always had my project up on the wall. But he proved to me once and all, in one moment, that I didn't know anything about anything. And it was really a wonderful moment looking back. It was a 2-year program. Rennie was the head of the drawing department. And he was the son of a gun. He grew up, he was orphaned at 3 years old in Hell's Kitchen, New York. He told me the story that this woman was walking home from down the alley and saw this child hanging up, scaffolding a couple of stories up, just dangling. And it was Rennie. So she ran up and grabbed him and took him home, because I don't know who was taking care of him. But she raised him. He said he was shot once, stabbed twice growing up in Hell's Kitchen, New York. And at the age of 30, he decided he wanted to be an artist, right? So he went to the Art Students League of New York, which is the famous art school there. And he said at the age of 30, he saw an artist paint, and he thought, that'd be cool, I'd love to do that. So he went there, and he said, I asked them a question about something, and they couldn't answer me, so I said, the hell with you, and left. And he said, I went home, I took my clothes off, looked at myself in the mirror, and drew myself. That's how I learned how to draw. And that's how he is. And he studied, he talked about aesthetics so beautifully. He studied, I don't know where he got all this information, but he gave me this concept that all of art can be broken down to 8 different visual approaches. And the first 4 has to do with light types, because artists painted the natural world for centuries and centuries before the abstract expressionism came. And so the first one was called oblique lighting, which is light and shadow, which is what Rembrandt does and Caravaggio. And as great as Da Vinci was, he didn't understand light and shadow. He could make things look like shadow and light, but he didn't understand it as shapes. He didn't see shadows and light as shapes. He sees them as just to create form. But Rembrandt saw light as a living thing, you see? And shadow is the thing that makes it alive. So that's a very subtle difference, but it's really important. So that's what I was doing in this class. So I was in somebody else's class, and I'm drawing. Rennie came into the beginning of the class, and he goes, what the hell are you doing? And I said, I'm just drawing here. And if you met Rennie, he walks with a little hunch. He's wearing a little vest. He looks like Karl Marx, big nose and big mustache, and his mustache is stained with cigarette stain. It's really funny. He either makes you cry or you love him, and he made plenty of people cry. But so he came in and he let me struggle on with it for 3 hours. Then he came back at the end of the class with 5 minutes left. And I've done this perfect drawing, everything is perfectly proportioned and shaded and everything. And he came in and he goes, he took one of those, and he pushed me aside like this. And he says, here, and he grabbed my brush. He didn't say, let me show you something. He's not nice like that. I was like, here, let me show you. He just grabbed it and he obliterated everything I did, just in 5 minutes. And he handed me the brush and walked out, didn't say a thing. And my classmate, sitting all around, like, oh my God, what did he just do to you? And I'm over here with like, oh my God, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It was amazing. And the paint was luscious, the colors glowing, and here I was painting in acrylics at the time. And so what he did, he didn't tell me this, but I understood this later. He came in, and I was seeing noses and arms and legs and proportions. He put down where the light is and where the shadow is. That's it. So I had already mapped it out for him, so it was easy. He just put down the right information. So he obliterated all those little details that were non-essential and made a painting out of it. So then after that, I always went to him and asked him, what's wrong? I'm working on an illustration. I said, can you help me with this? And he could help me fix it. He understood this visual vocabulary so well. So just to give you one of the different other 8 visual approaches. So that's oblique lighting, where you have a light source, a shadow source, a highlight, a halftone, a reflected light, a cast shadow. It's really actually very logical when I can explain it to you. But what happens if you step outside and the clouds come over on a winter day and there's no sun at all, but it's still daylight? What do you have? You have what's called local tone, which is a flat light situation. And without a bright sunlight or a light source, you see the local value. They call it local value, or the actual value of whatever you're looking at, right? the snow is white and my hair is black and the skin tone is whatever skin is. But if you put a light on it, that light would change the value, doesn't it? So think about it that way. Well, local tone as a visual approach is a really useful thing. If you think about the Japanese prints, the Japanese, bless their hearts, they step out and there's sunlight, they have lanterns, they never attempted to paint shadow and light. Never once, you know what I mean? They never attempted to replicate the feeling of form through shadow and light. Their art became just reducing everything down to values and shapes, because they were doing woodblocks with it for the most part. So there's not a lot of room for, they can do a little gradation of color, but they don't have much room to maneuver. But what happens with that is when you reduce to that set of limitation, then they started to experiment with the color of the thing they're looking at. So the sky, instead of just being, well, yeah, blue, can you shift it into a really beautiful blue-green or blue-yellow? Japanese prints are mesmerizingly beautiful to me. Not only that, but when they sign their name or say something, you have to carve around each character. So that's all that's left is the positive of it. So the intricate lines in the Japanese prints is actually carved around. It's insane. I would lose my mind trying to do that. But what happened? I haven't heard this. I don't know, Jordan, maybe you've heard this, but for me, looking at art history, I realized that Western art didn't become the modern movement that we know today until the Japanese prints hit the Impressionists. Think about it. The Impressionists were the first one to start to, they were still painting light and shadow, but they were starting to break up the paint, and so the paint became alive. And you know what I mean? It's the vibrational, they were using texture as part of their dialogue. But when Van Gogh, I think Van Gogh's a perfect example. He was trying to paint like Malay. He's trying to paint light and shadow without anybody explaining to him what light and shadow was. So for 7 years, he did terrible painting. If you look up his original 7 years of painting, they're really crappy. You know, they're full of life, but he doesn't understand shapes. He'll do a still life flower vase, and then he'll just put dark around it to make it pop. But he wasn't thinking of that dark as a shape. So look at it again, you'll see. Then he sees a Japanese print, and he copies one. And the angels descended and the skies opened. And he said, hell with form. And those are the Van Goghs that we know of today and love, right? He became, to me, he is the most interesting colorist in history, to me. Because I see him, once he realized his structure was local tone, value, flat values, and not about form, he could take wings, he could take liberty with colors, and he could weave 4 colors to get what he wants, you know. Then after that, Villard, another favorite of mine, used that system. But look and see, you'll see that before the Japanese prints, there was very little paintings in the West that was flat and related to the abstraction of the visual elements I gave you, right? But after that, it just broke wide open. So one thing led to another. Color can be flat, shapes can be flat, and then of course Picasso came. He did all of that by the time he was about 18. He understood it. Like at 14, he was drawing as well as Degas in his prime, you know. And then by 18, he had gone through all the movements. He went through what Van Gogh did, not as well as Van Gogh did, but he took that concept. And then he took it to Cubism, which is what I just showed you a minute ago, right? That's all Cubism is. But to understand, this is the secret behind what I know, what makes a good painting. And again, it comes from reading books like Fractal and so on, is that nature is uniquely specific. So why should my painting, when I make a shape, shouldn't it be that way too? So as chaotic as that painting is, over there, which is an invented painting, the exercise there is to replicate the feeling of autumn, which I love in Pennsylvania when you go through. It's so rich. In 1 square foot, you can see an infinity of color and shapes, you know. So that painting is to be loose and expressive, and yet at the same time, every shape is unique and specific, with its own color, its own dialogue, and if you take that painting and peel one corner off, the whole thing will unravel as one giant string in the end, because everything is connected the way that I showed you how I connected those floating shapes earlier. So there's uniqueness in each one, and at the same time, there's a oneness to the whole thing too. So every painting has that element to me. It's underneath it. You may or may not see it, but in fact, that's what's happening. That's even more important than the subject matter. So that's the orchestration of the whole thing. So local tone and light and shadow, and when I've been teaching for some 30, 40 years, and when I introduce light and shadow, everybody's, oh yeah, we go outside and paint. But then, especially a landscape, the sun's out and you're painting, and all of a sudden the clouds come over, and it wrecks your whole day because you don't know what to do with it. So in essence, I'll tell you another great story with Rennie, because this is how great he was. And I'm so grateful for the gift he gave me, because I'm giving that back now to when I teach. So he became a street person. He literally died on the street. When I was graduating school, he lost his job quickly after that. He was an alcoholic. And he wouldn't stop drinking, lost his job, and then his wife and kids in his house. And I tried to help him for about 5 years, a group of us. But he just did not want to stop drinking. And he told me as much. But one day I was walking down the street on Broadway, and I'm seeing this guy pushing a shopping cart up the street on First and Broadway. And I look down, and he's got a beard way down here, a white beard, and it was Rennie. And he's walking up, and I'm walking like, oh my God, that's Rennie. And he looks at me, and he says, we recognize each other, and he gave me this wry smile. You devil. He was doing that to me, and I'm doing that to him. So I said, oh, Rennie, what the hell are you doing? He said, oh, he tells me this whole story, how his truck got stolen, and all his art supplies are gone. He just makes this whole thing up. So I took him to lunch, and then put him up in a little motel down on Broadway for 3 days to get him off the street. And then the owners called me, because I knew the owners, and they called me and said, your friend left with the key. He thought he could sneak back in, you know. So we're sitting there at lunch, and he tells me this most profound thing about landscape painting. And I've painted with Richard Schmidt and David LaFell, all these wonderful painters, and nobody's ever said anything like this. He said, see that woman sitting over there in that booth? I go back to my studio and I can paint her without her being there, because I have a photographic memory. All I have to do is just get to capture the slope of the shoulder, and then I'll get her without even making it look like her. And then he said, you know, with landscape painting, people, you know, what the landscape painters don't understand is you can't capture it the way you think it looks, because things are moving all around, the light changes. The best that you can do is imply the time of day that you're seeing. You can imply the landscape. What did it look like? What did it feel like? What was the light like? You know, so you're not just copying along the way. And just like, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. So if you're doing a painting when the light is out and when the shadow is out, you have to decide what it is that you're trying to say. You know, you can say this is a light lit day with clouds in it, but the light is dominant. Or you can say this is a cloudy, dreary day, and then you better stick with that. Otherwise, you confuse the whole point of the painting. It's so simple, but it's so beautiful, right? Bam, just like that. And then he goes back on the street. and then he keeps going and talking about how, about this fantasy band that got stolen. You know, it's really amazing. But anyway, what a wonderful gift he gave me when I was 19 years old. It's still alive. And then I'm building on it with the concept of nature being uniquely specific and so on. So I'll give you a real quick thing about the other 4 visual approaches. The first 4 has to do with light types. So front lighting, which is form. Think about George O'Keeffe. George O'Keeffe's paintings, you don't know where the light source is coming from, but everything has form. And usually that's sort of a front lighting thing. And then you have backlight, which is silhouettes. Kim English does a lot of silhouetted paintings, you know. But the other 4 visual approaches are more abstract. So color can be one. Color as a visual approach means that color harmony is the point of the painting, right? It's not just squeezing paint straight out of the tube and using that. That's dumb. But that's why Van Gogh was so great, is he could make colors, he could mix colors. Richard Diebenkorn, one of my very favorites, his paintings are all about that. Gosh, there's so many. Mark Rothko is about that. Oh, I saw Mark Rothko retrospective, and after about 5 paintings, I got all that he had to say. And it was like, okay. You know, but Van Gogh or Diebenkorn, every painting is a different dialogue. It's so wonderful. So color is one, and so, do I have anything in here that I sort of, each one has a little bit of a color theme behind it, but not as much as I push, you know. I don't really, that color is sort of my final frontier. I think I'm going to be playing with that vocabulary a lot more in the future, you know. So, well, there's a peonies painting over here that's kind of graphic. It has a little bit of Diebenkornish stuff going on, but that was a color play. So that's the beginning of it. So color is one. Line can be a visual approach on its own. So you're making shapes, and you're creating different expressions of line, right? And so a dialogue is that the line, everything comes back to shape anyway. Dark and light pattern. Dark and light, think of Robert Mulloway and his elegy to something or another, to the Republic or Spanish Republic or something. These dark and light shapes. But there's a few Andrew White paintings that were even more powerful to me, with a dark and light pattern, just a house against a simple background. If you look it up, that's the concept. Even though he's painting farms and fields, everything is abstracted down to one singular shape against that light shape, see? So, in a way, the horses over there could be a dark light pattern. See the group of horses here? I could turn that into just a dark light pattern against the background. So another thing is, and then the last thing is equalization. Equalization is like Jackson Pollock, when you do a painting without focal points, right? So Jackson Pollock was doing all these drips, but the whole point of it is that each pattern has a different shape. And then, but in the 1500s, Bruegel had already done that. And he painted a whole town very realistically, but there's no focal point. It's just the whole point is that things are moving all over, you see. So I incorporate, that's absolutely an equalization painting. That's a light shadow painting with equalization as a secondary visual approach. So that's the intention, right? So with each painting there should be a dominant visual approach, and you can introduce all the other things too. I'll give you another secret to my madness about how I look at the world, right? So equalization, I think about making how I explain Jackson Pollock is this. You take a giant salad bowl and you toss in all your ingredients, dark greens, light greens, white eggs, yellow yolk, red tomatoes, whatever, black olives, whatever ingredients you want to put in there, and you turn it all up and you throw it up in the air and it goes over the floor. Maximum randomness, right? And you say, well, how can you do a painting of that? Well, here's how you find order in that. The way I see it is, imagine, okay, ignore everything else. Just look for where all the egg whites are. And you'll begin to see that there's a pattern to it. It has a skeleton of its own. And then ignore that and see what the red tomatoes are. They're not all going to be in one clump, obviously, right? And so you see what each pattern is saying to each other. And the one that is the most obvious pattern, right, the one that you can read the clearest, put that down first. That will anchor your entire painting, because everything else will relate back to that, you see. So when I go out to do a landscape, or paint a figure, or even as chaotic as that figure in the woods like that, I could do that because I can see the order in it really fast. And I know where all the values belong, where all the shapes belong, what's important, what's not important. So that's Jackson Pollock. If you look at his paintings again, you'll see that each pattern is a separate thing. And the art critics and the art writers talk about he's important because he didn't use a brush to paint. What the heck are you talking about? That's got nothing to do with it. So anyhow, there's a concept that there's no art without intention. And there's no great art without awareness. Now we can all tap into our child nature, which is the intuitive nature, and then you can let go and, you know, and let things happen. Sometimes I like to do that, and then let that tell me where to go. But in the end, there has to be a marriage between you know, mind and soul, mind and spirit in a sense, you know. So there has to be a bit of, I won't kind of get too intellectual. I don't like to get too intellectualized about it, but there has to be an understanding about it. Do you have any questions so far about any of this? I'd be happy to. Is it that clear? So I'll just tell you a little bit about some of these paintings. It'll be kind of fun. The still life that you see in front. So still life has been the very foundational part of my painting growing up. And you know, as a student and as a young artist, the easiest thing to do is set up something to paint from. And I was inspired by Richard Schmid, was doing such beautiful still lifes, but then David LaFell too. And David was doing paintings that were very different than Richard. You know, he was interested in light shadow like Rembrandt. Whereas Richard would paint the pattern as it goes across the canvas. He leads your eye this way. Richard leads your eye, David leads your eye this way. But so for me, I would set up a painting and did that. And I realized over the years, my still lives really are the best thing that I do. You know, I'm really at home with it. And I love it's like orchestrating a classical symphony. Like every note has a balance with every other note. Sometimes one little dot ding, you know, and it would balance the whole entire painting. But if I did that ding again without awareness, it jumps out at me, like, and so I never repeat myself. Again, that nature thing. So now I just paint once or twice a year maybe. That's the first big one I've done in a while. The last one I painted for the museum in Kerrville was entirely made up, and it was really an exciting one, but it sold to somebody in Pennsylvania. So that one was actually the flowers from our garden. I set it up, painted the whole thing in about 3 or 4 days, and then I took it out to Denver and painted the rest of it, which you see is the background is Japanese tapestry with swallows. So when I painted in Pennsylvania, it wasn't there. I just invented it, you know, just to harmonize it with the rest of it. So there's that, and then just immediately I go and do the other still life, which is very graphic and flat shapes, because they're both equally interesting to me. You know, I can imagine spending some time when I get back home to explore that concept a little more, and just go flat for a while and really enjoy the colors and the fact. Honestly, I put that painting in there thinking, I don't know if I really buy that, you know, whatever. But I would put it in anyway. One of the first ones I sold. About that. You just never can tell. Every time I've tried to second guess what will sell, I'm wrong. Yeah. But the public and the universe has a way of saying, follow your heart, follow your interest. And I think it's true. When you think about the audience, in a way you're disrespecting the audience by thinking about what the audience would like, you know. So it took me a long ass time to learn that. But what's nice is I've been, you know, confirmed enough, because every time I do a solo show, ever since the first show, I always put in something that I've been experimenting with. I always have done that. Never, even when somebody told me, you shouldn't do that. Keep doing one thing. But I've always done that. Michael Sachs, bless his heart. My first show was there. And at the time, I hadn't done that much figurative work. I painted from life and so on stuff. I mean, still lifes and landscapes. And he sold out the show. But then I started painting nude figures from the league, which is really beautiful and interesting. And I gave him a number of paintings, and they didn't sell. They weren't that good. Was the reason why they didn't sell. And he said, well, maybe you should. If you know Michael, he talks like this. Maybe you shouldn't bring those anymore. And that's all I gave him for the next 5 months. Until he started to sell them, and then he never told me not to bring. So I love Michael, but you know, that's what's fun for me is the feeling, is not knowing what will happen next. You know, is having an idea without knowing where it will lead me, and that's what gets me excited about painting. You know, get up in the morning. So I mean, there's some really mundane things like the cows. You know, driving around Pennsylvania and seeing cows next to a fence. Like, that's the coolest thing ever. You know, just cows. Cows are so amazing. And then there's a landscape back there with a dark, deep, you know, little